India.
A vibrant, noisy, and chaotic place.
Though the country is drowned in spirituality like no other in the world. Even in busy Mumbai, a spiritual sage can be found.
Oh, there is a man called Ramesh Balsekar.
We talk about life.
We are all a very close-knit family. We are 3 brothers, 1 sister. All of us stay in the same building. We have separate flats. This building was built by my father.
It's great to visit someone like him in his private house, not in an ashram.
Oh, it was just fun. I used to be there for the talks when there were very few people around. But as the group grew bigger, I moved out.
I knew I had to see him. It was this inner pull. I knew I had to be here. So that was about a year ago.
First time I came to Ramesh was 4 years ago.
About 2 years ago, I was here for the first time.
I read some books and heard some tapes and thought, this is somebody I would love to go and see.
Since a few years, I thought if I go to Mumbai, I will see Ramesh.
First and foremost, I'm not concerned in changing the world. God has created the world. Let God look after His world. I'm not joking. I have no message for the world. I can have a message for the world only if I want to change the world from one something to another thing. My whole point is the world is perfect as it is, the way it is supposed to be, according to the cosmic law of God's will. And it is because we want to change what is into an illusory what should be that the human being suffers. That is my whole basic point. Therefore, I have no message for the world except let life flow. The individual should be concerned only with himself. That's my point. The individual who is concerned with bettering the society, what I call the do-gooders, are still as selfish as anyone else. And there again, they want to change what is into an illusory what should be according to their concepts. Isn't it? What they want to do is to have a society the way they think society should be. It's their concept. How do we know that their concept is the right concept? My point, therefore, is if I, as an individual, change because I think change is necessary in me, and if that change is acceptable to the society will adopt that change which they see in me. And the only question which the individual should therefore ask is, which everyone, am I happy with this, the way I live my life? Am I happy? If he is, he doesn't have to be concerned about the society. isn't it? Every individual, what does he want most in life? To be happy. Therefore, I must decide, am I happy now? If I am, no question of doing anything. Just living my life the way I am living. But if I decide that I am not happy, then I have to find out, why am I not happy? You see? So if I am not happy, what is the reason? So my main point here is, all this I have to decide for myself. I am thinking things out for myself. What usually happens, Peter? What does usually happen? What happens usually is, I want happiness. What do? I go to the bookshop, buy half a dozen books and happy. What is happiness? That is not going to do me any good. Therefore, my first point is, if I want happiness, I must decide what I want.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, for me, first thing is, am I happy now? I say no. Then I have to decide for myself, not read books but others tell me. First and foremost, you see what I mean? What does usually happen? I'm a spiritual seeker. What do? I go to people, read books to find out what the others have to tell me. What I am saying is, the best way is to start with oneself. Even spiritual seeker, what do they want out of spiritual seeking? You can't get happiness in this life. Therefore, am I happy? Answer is no. Then why am I not happy? Immediately the answer is, why am I not happy in life? Immediately, life means from morning till evening, a relationship with the other. The other may be my wife and son, or a close relative, or a neighbor as far as my home is concerned. The other represents my close relative or a neighbor. Then when the circle expands, I go to the office. Then the other means my other people in my office, the clients for the office, people working in the office, senior to me, subordinate to me, and the client, and the circle expands to include the strangers. See what I mean? Therefore, my question is, I am not happy because my relationship with the other, whether he is the closest relative or a stranger, is not harmonious. See what I mean? And unless my relationship with the other is harmonious, how can I be happy? Therefore, I can only be happy if my relationship with the other is harmonious. Why is my relationship with the other not harmonious? For the very simple reason, the other does not always do what I want him or her to do. And common sense, I cannot expect the other to be doing all the time what I want him or her to do.
Or vice versa, they want me something to do that I don't want.
I'm not concerned with their happiness, Peter. Let me be clear. I'm not concerned with their happiness. I'm concerned with my happiness. Therefore, my happiness depends on my relationship with the other. And I cannot expect the other always to be doing what I expect them to do. That is the dead end in my seeking for happiness. See what I mean? I cannot be happy unless the other keeps on doing whatever I want, and that can't be done. Therefore, does it mean that I cannot be happy in this life? Answer is, no, that is not so. Why? Because everybody knows at least one or two people who are transparently happy. Most people are unhappy like me, I see that. But there are still one or two people who live like me, suffer the same pains I have to suffer, enjoying the same pleasures that I am enjoying, and yet they are transparently happy. Then why do I say they are transparently happy? They are never uncomfortable with the other. They are never uncomfortable with themselves. They are always relaxed. That is why I think they are transparently happy. Therefore, the only thing I can do is to go to one of them and ask them, am I right in saying that? And they will say yes or no. If there is no way he can help me. But if there is someone who says, yes, I am happy, and I can tell you why I am happy. And yes, I say I am happy in the same circumstance. Mm-hmm. So your question is, what is my secret? My secret is what the Buddha told me, not as a secret, quite openly, 2,500 years ago. Anybody could have, he meant it for the whole world. But somehow, the rest of the world seemed to ignore it. It was my good luck to accept what he said. And what does Buddha say? Buddha says, events happen, deeds are done. Deeds appear to be done, but there is no individual doer of any deed. And the happy person, if he has not heard of the Buddha, gives me the same message, Peter. That is the beauty of it. The Buddha put it in words. Nothing is a deed done by anybody. Therefore, there is no question of my blaming anybody for anything, neither me nor the other. The happy man doesn't know about the Buddha. He may not even care about the Buddha. But the happy man tells me the same thing. He says, why are you so transparently happy? Because he says, I don't blame myself for anything. I don't blame anyone else for anything. Everything happens according to God's will. He said, that's what I have been told since my childhood. My religion tells me the same thing. Nothing can happen unless it is God's will. God for me means the source, the one source from which everything is emanated, good, bad or indifferent. Therefore, my point is, all manifestation and its functioning that we call life is based on duality. The one unmanifest has become the many in the manifestation. And the basis of the manifestation is duality, beginning with male and female. Beginning with male and female, everything in the universe, every conceivable pair of opposites or polaric counterpart, whichever. Never has been a time when there were no bad people. There was never a moment in which there was nothing ugly. There was nothing at any moment when there were no handicapped babies. Every moment, both the interconnected opposites have always been there, beginning with male and female. And that the man of understanding is able to accept. Therefore, he knows that his own body-mind organism, his own personality, has both good points and bad points. Because of that, in the man of understanding, first thing you notice is humility. Humility in oneself leads to tolerance in the other. The man of, I am not perfect, how can I expect the other to be perfect? Therefore, I don't blame myself for anything. I don't blame anyone else for anything. And truly, I think that is the only reason I'm transparently happy, as you can see. I don't blame anyone, neither myself nor the other. So that is the basic concept I have. And if I am able to accept that totally, now rest of it I have to find out. Why is the happy man transparently happy? Because he doesn't blame either himself or the other. What is the result of that? In fact, he doesn't create a suffering for himself by accepting no one is a doer. Whereas I have created suffering for myself by believing I am the doer of my action, the other is the doer of his actions, and we are both responsible for our actions. So what is the unhappiness? What is the suffering I have created for myself by these wrong beliefs? And that is, I know from personal experience, the load of shame and guilt for my bad actions, and the hatred and malice I have for the other for his bad action. His bad action means hurting me. Let me be clear. I am not concerned with the other's life. I am only concerned with the other's life as it affects me. You see? If I go into further, then I generalize, I go into philosophy. I don't care a damn for philosophy. I am thinking of my own personal happiness. Therefore, I find that I am not happy because I have created a load of suffering for myself. What is the suffering? Suffering is load of guilt and shame for my actions and hatred and malice towards many others who have hurt me some way or another, physically, psychologically, or financially. I went to someone with a great hope that he is a financial genius. The money I have, the little money I have, he should be able to tell me how to invest it so that I make 100% yield every year. I thought he would help me. And what did he do? He gave me a tip which removed all my capital. I hate him. Financially, I've been hurt. I may be hurt psychologically. I may be hurt physically. Whatever I'm saying is, I hate someone who has hurt me. And there are plenty of people whom I have considered who have hurt me one way or another. Therefore, what is the suffering which I have created for myself? And that is the two loads. One load of hatred for myself, which turns into guilt and shame, and hatred for the other. And if I am able to accept totally, no one does anything. Whatever has happened according to God's will, cosmic law. And whichever way a happening affects whoever it is, again according to the cosmic law. Therefore, whatever I thought was my action, whatever I thought was the other's action, now I know that is only a happening. A happening which happened through me and hurt someone, or a happening which happened through the other and hurt me. That is the basis of it. Previously, I thought I had hurt someone. I felt guilty, hatred for me, which is guilt, or the hatred for the other. That is the suffering which I created for myself. And this total acceptance of this concept, no one does anything, immediately at that instant removes both loads, so that I don't hate myself for anything I have done. I don't hate the other for anything I used to think he did. So I come to the conclusion, truly, if I want to be happy, all I really have to do is to be able to accept totally. Nothing happens unless it is the will of God. Problem is that your earlier acceptance of everybody doing whatever he does is so powerful that it is not easy to change to a fresh concept of nobody doing it. Now, it is difficult to give it up because that has been there for thousands of years. But I'm not saying it is easy. Have I ever said it's easy? Don't you remember I said, among the many people, hardly one or two people I see as transparently happy. You see? Therefore, what I'm not saying is, oh, I could go to my neighbor and find out, why are you so happy? It is not. My neighbor is as unhappy as I am. See? Only one or two people who are transparently happy. So that is your answer. Your question is, among the 6 billion people, why should only a few thousand be happy? Is that your question?
Why is it?
Among the 6 billion people, why are only a few thousand people happy? What is the answer? The answer, Peter, is again the basic concept of every religion, which every one of us has heard since we were children. Nothing happens unless it is God's will. So if it is a fact now that only hardly a point something percentage of people are really happy, isn't that because that is how life is supposed to be according to the will of God? In other words, the extent of the happiness depends on the extent of the total acceptance of this basic concept. Why are people not ready to accept such an obvious fact? It's an obvious fact, isn't it? And yet we are not able to accept it. Therefore, in anything, in a classroom, for any classroom, those who are really successful are only a few. So it is part of life that only a few will be successful at something. Most of the others try but are not successful. That is the very basis of life as it happens. That is the very basis of life. Was there any time when the percentage was higher? Of course there could be. Was there a time when the percentage was even lower than it is now? Could be. So to what extent the percentage of happiness goes up or down is again according to the cosmic law. But the important point I'm saying here is that what is happiness is important, isn't it? Basically, having thought personally about myself, why I am not happy, to what extent are people happy in each nation? That's an interesting study, isn't it? And that study was made, Peter, some years ago, 4, 5, 6 years ago, by the professors of the London School of Economics. Not by any ordinary people, not by a journalist, not by a media man, made by the professors of the London School of Economics. The relationship between money and happiness. Money means not just money, but material benefits. Relationship between money and what money can buy, Money means what money? And happiness. And do you know what the conclusion they came to, Peter? Do you know the conclusion they came to? The happiest people in the world are, who do you think? Americans, Austrians?
Well, I think I've read about it. It was Bangladesh.
It was Bangladesh. When you read it, didn't you say this is rubbish? Didn't you say, how can one of the poorest nations in the world, the Bangladeshi, be the happiest people in the world? And the answer is provided. The London School of Economics didn't get the answer, but I have the answer. They didn't get the answer because they were not looking for an answer. They were only looking for facts. The answer is because the average Bangladeshi is able to accept nothing can happen unless it is the will of God. The Bangladeshis are at the top. Another very poor nation, India, do you know where it comes? No. 5th or 6th. United States, one of the richest people. You know where it comes? 45th. You know where England comes? 32nd. I have no idea where Austria comes. See what I mean? Therefore, my point is, it so happens, statistics prove the Buddha's concept. Statistics prove the Buddha's concept. The Bangladeshi is able to accept. Nothing can be done unless it is supposed to happen. And there's another one, another concept about suffering, which I have. You have seen people coming here, really pitying themselves, feeling deeply unhappy about some situation they are in. There was a couple some time ago. You remember them, whose daughter, with an arranged marriage, an Indian, both are living in the States, and they're an arranged marriage. Their horoscopes were tallied, everything was done, perfect marriage, the astrologer must have said. Now they have split, and they are in the process of divorce. So both of them, the people concerned, may be quite happy with the arrangement. But the parents here were deeply unhappy. So that's when they're deeply unhappy. So for this suffering, this is nothing to do with the research of the London School of Economics professor. This question is, this man, they said, I could see that. I could see that in their faces. They were so unhappy, so much pity for themselves. So he asked, they really asked me, is there something you can help me? I said, yes. I can help you, provided you are able to accept another concept of mine. Whatever I can do is a concept. So I told them, I do have a, which has worked in my case, which has worked in many cases. A very simple thing. Whenever I feel extremely sorry for myself, when I pity myself, all I have to do is think of thousands of people who are much worse than I am. All I have to think of thousands of people who suffer much more immensely than I could ever have thought of. And then ask yourself, you are so sorry for yourself now, would you rather be in their position? You would. Therefore, I said frankly, if you think about it, then what will happen? You will thank God for your suffering. Isn't it right? I shall thank God for my suffering, which is nothing compared to the suffering of thousands of people. What I am saying is, if you are really suffering and pitying yourself, compare yourself with the others. If you are happy with yourself, don't compare yourself with some other happier person. I'm not telling you. Then if you want to be unhappy, then compare yourself with someone else who is happier. I'll tell you exactly what happened once. I was in Ahmedabad, a prosperous place, one of the bigger branches. I was in charge there. So on my regular visits to rich people, I visited one rich man. So I made a guess that he must be worth at least 10 million. This 40 years ago, maybe. He must be worth at least 10 million. So we were talking. So I said, must congratulate you, you're doing so well, your mill is doing so well. And you must be worth at least $10 million. He jumped up. How did I know? I said, please, it's just, I'm making a wild guess. But apparently my wild guess is not too wild. And he was, so I said, I'm happy for you. So he was happy. Just for a second, Peter. Just for a second. Then he said, yes, I am. But do you know what my neighbor is worth? He is worth 50 million rupees. Very sad. So, if you don't want to be happy, compare your happiness with someone else. Then you'll be less happy. I'm not asking, the only thing I say, I'm talking of the suffering. If you think you have suffering, think of the suffering of the others. This is my concept. Just as someone comes and says, I agree that it's a lovely concept. No one does anything. No one to be blamed for anything. Lovely concept. Intellectually, I accept it. Intellectually, I also accept that how deep my acceptance is will again depend on the cosmic law. Whether I'm going to be able to accept it totally or not is again God's will. That also I understand. So this is the answer to this. Is that's where you started. This is only an intellectual acceptance.
Yeah.
This has to be total acceptance. So the obvious answer is there is nothing I can do to make my acceptance, intellectual acceptance, total acceptance, because I'm not the doer. That is clear. But if you then ask me, is there something you suggest that while I'm waiting for something to happen, is there something I can do? Then I can suggest it. I make a suggestion. And that suggestion is what I call personal investigation. Would you like to know what that personal investigation is?
Yes.
All right, it's very simple. I keep repeating, this is not a discipline. You don't have to stand on your head for half an hour. You do not have to sit in meditation for 2 hours. You don't have to do anything except a simple investigation. You must do that yourself. And that investigation is, assuming you are busy throughout the day, at the end of the day, take 20-30 minutes off, sit quietly, again, be comfortable. And if you want to be comfortable, you want your usual glass of beer, have it. This is not a discipline. So be comfortable. Try to arrange to the extent that you can that you are not likely to be disturbed. And for 20th, do some very simple investigation. Very simple investigation. From the many events of the day, choose one happening which you are sure is your action. Just one. You are so sure. Others I don't know. But this one is my action. And I challenge anybody to prove to me that it is not my action. Any bet. You are so sure. Then find out for yourself. Simple question, simple investigation. If I consider this action my action, did I decide to do that action at a particular time? My action. Then you say, no, your investigation, no, I didn't. How did that action happen? Then you remember, a thought happened to me. And that thought led to my action. If that thought had not happened, my action would not have happened. And I had no control over the happening of that thought. How can I call it my action? You do the investigation yourself, and you come to the conclusion that the action which you are so sure as your action turns out on investigation not to be your action. And then the intellectual acceptance goes a little deeper automatically because of this, your own investigation. And if you keep on doing this investigation, every single time, the acceptance goes deeper and deeper. So you can take as many actions as you want, analyze them, investigate them. And what I'm telling you with great confidence, Peter, is every single time, without exception, every single time you'll come to the conclusion, what I thought was my action turns out to be an action which depended on the happening of another action over which I had no control. If I had not happened to be at a certain place and time and seen something, my action wouldn't have happened. If I had not happened to be at a certain place and time and heard two people talking, the tremendous investment I'm proud of would not have happened. Therefore, I cannot call this my action. Now we are going into where we are talking of free will. Now we have moved into a question, does Peter have free will in life or no? And my answer is yes, Peter has total free will to do whatever he likes. And I'll tell you how. Throughout your life, you have this free will. Make no mistake. Throughout your life, every human being has had the free will to do whatever he thought he should do. Throughout life, what does life mean? Life means dealing with a situation as it arises. Isn't it? What is life? What situation arises at any time, nobody has any control. But life means I have to deal with a situation as I face it. And in dealing with a situation, whatever the situation, for whichever man 10,000 years ago, or now, or 10,000 years later, circumstances are exactly the same. The caveman 10,000 years ago had to face a situation, facing like me, had to face a situation. The nature and quality of the situation is different. But the basic fact of life, meaning dealing with a situation, has been the same for the human being 10,000 years ago or now or 10,000 years later. And that is, in a given situation, what do I want? Who decides that? You have to decide it yourself. In a given situation, what do I want? Peter has to decide for himself. And in order to get what I want, what kind of effort I should put in? Who decides that? Peter does. Therefore, in any given situation, in life, at any time, the human being concerned has total free will to decide what he wants and to put in the kind of effort he wants to put in. Total free will. But what is the experience in life of every human being? Having done whatever I wanted to do according to my free will, what actually happened has never been in anyone's control. That is the lifetime experience. Do I have free will? I have total free will to do whatever I want at this time in that given situation. My free will. But what actually happens has always been God's will. See? Therefore, Peter, incredible as it may seem, your will and God's will have been going on together for thousands of years and will go on for thousands of years. Therefore, my point is, your free will is not against God's will. Incredible as it may seem, my concept, Peter, is your free will and God's will function in life at the same time. So the question is what seems like your free will really your free will? Agreed? Is my free will, out of which I do whatever I want, full motivation? Then the question is, what is the basis on which Vikram's free will is based? Right. According to my concept, Vikram's free will and everybody's free will is based on two factors, over neither of which did anybody have any control. What are the two factors? Genes plus conditioning. You had no choice over being born to particular parents. Therefore, you had no choice about the genes in this human object. And now, as you know, more and more research says whatever happens is not really our doing, but it can be traced to some gene or the other which made us do it. So, genes is a very powerful factor. That is one factor. The other factor is what I call conditioning. Just as you had no control over being born to particular parents, you had no control over being born to particular parents in a particular geographical environment and a particular social status in that environment. And in that environment, this body-mind organism receives its conditioning from day one. Conditioning at home, conditioning in that relevant society, conditioning in that relevant school and college and university, conditioning in your church or temple. Bombardment, this is good, that is bad. This is, you must do this, you must never do that. And my point is, whatever anyone decides to do at any moment out of his free will is based entirely on your genes over which you have no control, and the up-to-date conditioning over which also you have no, I say up-to-date conditioning, because what has happened this morning is conditioning, make no mistake. I have not told you the truth. I have only given you my concept, which tallies with the Buddha's concept. Therefore, this is fresh conditioning. And each fresh conditioning can amend or alter the existing conditioning or even transform it. What it does is again according to the cosmic law, your destiny. But the fact remains that whatever I decide to do and do is based entirely on two factors which God made. I decide and do what I want to do, based on my genes and conditions which God made. Therefore, Vikram, the conclusion I come to inevitably is whatever I have just done is precisely what God wanted me to do. See what I mean? Whatever the consequences are also depending on God's will. So the result of it is, whatever the consequences, good, bad or indifferent, having done whatever I have done, it will be stupid of me to think I have made a mistake. How can I make a mistake when what I have done is precisely what God wanted me to do? With that understanding, it's a real bonus. With that understanding, I no longer waste a lot of time and energy on thinking about my mistakes, what I did which I shouldn't have done, what I should have done and didn't do. I no longer bother with it. I make no mistake, and more important for many people, Vikram, I cannot commit a sin. I have done precisely what God wanted me to do. Whatever the consequences, I repeat, which are also God's will, I have not committed a sin. But if you are still interested, and if you do the analysis, you will find that your free will is based on God's will. That is the joke, that's the real joke in life. Does my free will prevail? Every single time. But if I have the patience and the curiosity to find what is my free will based on, my free will is based on God's will. Therefore, at that moment, what happens? If I come to the conclusion, my apparent free will is based on God's will, what should be my reaction? Helplessness, willing, helplessness. Therefore, I am a robot. I am a puppet. Helplessness, isn't it? Or I can go to the other extreme. This is, my glass is half empty. The others say my glass is half full. So in what way is my glass half full? I say, hey, whatever I have just done, I thought was my doing, and I could not stop wondering, some cases, whether what I have just done is a mistake, and in many cases, what I have just done, I have fallen a prey to temptation. Have I committed a sin? Now I know. Nothing can happen. My free will itself is based on God's will. Therefore, whatever I have just done, I cannot make a mistake. I cannot commit a sin. Glass is half full. Do I have a free will? You have total free will. But find out, and you will come to the conclusion that your real free will is only apparent, it's not real. And that is a great boon. Do I have free will? Yes, you have free will. But investigate it and you will say that free will is fake. But go a step further and you will say this is a tremendous boon not to have free will. Then what happens is, if everything is predetermined, why should I get out of my bed?
I agree.
And
Totally.
for that, the answer is there. Now, if that is your question, I can give you the answer.
No, we
If
talked about
everything is predetermined, why should I get out of my bed in the
because
morning?
it gets up. Because it doesn't do anything.
Because you can't help it.
Exactly.
And what I'm saying is, life means making effort. The basis of life and living is making effort in a given situation. In a given situation, you decide what you want, positive thinking, good health, big muscles, a lovely husband, and for that reason, you do whatever you think you should do. Therefore, motivation and free will is yours. I must make it clear. In accepting what is, if I see something which I think I can correct, my point is in any given situation, I must use my total free will to do what I think I should do. Therefore, in accepting any position what is, if I think something is wrong, I certainly do whatever I think I can do to put it right. And thereafter I accept the what is. And whichever happens over which I have no control, the society in which I live takes it as my action. And I know that I haven't done anything. That is the situation. So an action happens. The society considers it a good action. Ramesh should be rewarded. Then what happens? Then the reward from the society means for me, Ramesh, my ego, pleasure. And we certainly enjoy that pleasure, my ego and I, which is the same thing, of course. If the society rewards me for something, I thoroughly enjoy the pleasure with a certain amount of amusement that the society rewarded me for what I know is not my action. Next, another action happens which the society considers bad action. Ramesh should be punished, which means pain and regret in the moment. I have no choice over the pleasure, I have no choice over the pain, which the society abhors me. So I have to bear the pain and regret. But knowing that it is not my action, the pleasure is not accompanied by pride, the pain is not accompanied by guilt or shame. And that is life, moment to moment. Sometimes pain, sometimes pleasure. But pain and pleasure are not accompanied by either guilt or shame or pride and arrogance. And the absence of pride and arrogance and guilt and shame for my action means peace within myself. What happens when I get cheated? I get angry, Peter. More accurately, anger arises.
Yes.
More accurately, anger arises. And what happens more often than not, almost always, the anger is almost promptly accompanied by amusement that I was such a damn fool to be cheated. If I'm cheated, I deserve to be cheated. Anger followed by amusement. That is what happens.
So you don't punish the person?
In any case, the fact that I am cheated, what is my very basic understanding? A happening has happened which cheated me. Whether the happening has happened, A, B is irrelevant. The relevant point is, a happening had to happen by which I was cheated, and that is what happened. So the question of who cheated me simply doesn't arise anymore, because there is no individual doer. That is the whole point.
But so anyone can come and take any kind of advantage out of me, for example, because I'm not reacting at all?
Wait a minute. There is an old Arabian saying in exactly this point. It says, have trust in God, but tether your camel. Yeah. Now I say, have faith in God, but lock your car. Have faith in God, but lock your door with all the necessary precautions. And in spite of that, if your destiny is to be cheated according to the cosmic law, you damn well will be cheated. And then you have to accept it as a happening. That's the whole point. Because it is happening, I'm not saying it precludes me from doing something. Whole point is, in any given situation, people, never forget, in any given situation, my total free will to do whatever I think I should do, to protect myself. No question. Let me tell you a joke. A young lady was walking along the pavement, and the inner voice told her, stop. So she stopped. And then a huge boulder fell right in front of her. And if she had walked, she would have been dead. It would have fallen right on her head. She was impressed. Then she got further towards the end of the pavement. And the traffic light said, walk. And she was about to take a step, but again the voice said, stop. And then a drunken driver of the car came and he said, if she had stepped, she would have been dead. Now she was really impressed. So she said, who are you? And the voice said, I'm your guardian angel. Then she said, oh, you're my guardian angel, are you? What the hell were you doing when I got married? Some happening happened. It hurt some, it helped some. Therefore, the horrible thing that is now known as 9/11, when we saw it on the screen, millions of people must have seen it on the screen, and horrible. And the report was 5,000 people or 3,000 or 5,000 people were killed, and many more were injured. So that happening was a bad happening for many. And yet, for the small group who organized it, for Osama bin Laden and his group, when they saw on the screen the extent of the damage, they must have been absolutely glad and thanked heaven. They must have fallen on their knees and thank you, Allah, thank you. We hoped only about 100 people would be killed, and you have killed 3,000 people. Thank you. Anything that comes from the source, call it God, call it consciousness, call it the source, call it the absolute, or as Albert Einstein called it, from outside. Albert Einstein has gone on record. The famous equation that made him famous, theory of relativity, E is equal to mc square, came from outside. He's gone on record, it came from outside. The meaning is, he didn't create the equation. Any other scientist would probably have said, I discovered that. But he, on record, said, the equation came to me from outside. Call it from God. The most famous mathematician today, Stephen Hawking, the one in that wheelchair, he has come to the he says clearly, no, yes and no. Is everything predetermined? Question mark. Yes, comma, it is. So what I'm saying is, my concept, yes. But it is not a concept, but a conclusion arrived at by the most brilliant mathematician, that everything is predetermined. But he adds, knowing that everything is predetermined is not going to help you very much, because you will never know what it is that is predetermined. But even the he has come to the conclusion through his mathematical equation that everything is predetermined. The physicists say it's a block, meaning the whole thing is there. The first thing, the wisdom that is created with this total understanding, call it self-realization, call it enlightenment, call it what you will. The first thing that happens is total acceptance. Everything in this world is based on duality, both the interconnected opposites of every conceivable kind. Therefore, the first thing the man of wisdom comes to understand is his own body-mind organism, his own personality has both good points and bad points. Therefore, how can he expect the other, relationship with whom is the basis of life, to be perfect? I am not perfect. I cannot expect the other to be perfect. So therefore, the first thing you notice in the man of wisdom is his genuine humility and his tolerance about the other.
We've seen in front of us miraculous cures that take place because of the person's change in attitude or positive thinking or whatever you may call.
Yes.
So would you
would
you say it's all predestined?
Yes. I would say the miracles were supposed
So why
to...
does the person want to make an effort, sir, then?
Why did the miracles happen? Because they were supposed to happen. And for miracles to happen, the effort had to happen. Cause and effect. I'll tell you what happens about cause and effect. A leads to B, B leads to C, C leads to D. That is your cause and effect. A, arrow B, arrow C, arrow D, right? My understanding is the arrow is double pointed. D has to happen, therefore C has to happen. C has to happen, therefore B has to happen. B has to happen, therefore A has to happen. Millions of Jews had to be killed. Why? According to the cosmic law, basis of which we can never understand. Why can we not understand the basic of the cosmic law? Because the cosmic law affects the entire universe, not just the earth. Entire universe for all time, the block. Whereas our intellect is very limited. So we can never, ever in a million years, even try to know the basis of the cosmic law. Having accepted nothing works except God's will, with that understanding, I still have to live my life as the same separate entity which earlier had not accepted God's will. I still have to live my life as the same entity. And there is a tremendous...
So there's only intelligence is living, that's all.
No, wait a minute. Tremendous confusion about the word ego. The tremendous confusion is most people, most spiritual seekers are told enlightenment means the end of the ego. That is simply not so, for one obvious reason. Any sage, any of our old Rishi Munis, Jesus Christ, the Buddha, Ramana Maharshi, whoever it is, even after total enlightenment, responded to his name being called. Anyone, Ramana Maharshi, when you called him by name, whatever it is, Swami, Bhagwan, whatever, he responded. So the fact that a sage responds to his name being called means there is a separate individual entity. You see?
The purpose of entity is nothing.
The purpose of entity, you mean why should egos have been created? Yeah. Another interesting question. And that is, the egos, the source had to create ego because the basis of life is interhuman relationships. Friendship and enmity, love and hate, and the basis of life is interhuman relationship. And for interhuman relationship, egos had to be created. So egos were created for interhuman relationships to happen. And some of the egos, the destiny of some of the egos was to seek the answer to this question. And those egos who seek spiritual seekers, they were told, and they are still being told, that enlightenment, freedom means freedom from the ego. And therefore the sage has no ego, which, as I just told you, is rubbish. The fact that a sage responds to it, obviously the ego is there. Therefore, if I have an ego and the sage has an ego, where is the difference? My answer is, the ego of the sage has been able to accept totally that he is not the doer. No one is a doer. That is the difference. The ego of an ordinary person thinks he is a doer and everybody is a doer.
The meaning of that ego, which accepts the totally, that I am not a doer.
Yes.
That's just the being thing, that's all.
No, there what has happened is, let me put it this way. What is spiritual seeking? Freedom, right? Spiritual seeker seeks freedom. Therefore the question is, who is seeking freedom from what? Always, every single case, it has to be the ego who is seeking freedom. The ego is seeking freedom from what? Freedom from suffering. Ego is seeking freedom from suffering. The ego is not seeking freedom from himself. And that is what he is told. If you want freedom, kill the ego. How can you help the ego not being confused? The ego seeks freedom from suffering. And the ego says, ego is the problem, therefore you have to kill the ego. And other than the ego, there is no you. That is a horrible confusion. Therefore, my point is, who is seeking what? The ego seeker is seeking freedom from suffering. And only when he comes to know that his suffering is based entirely on his sense of personal doership. When he knows that, the ego seeks freedom from his own sense of personal doership, which has caused him the suffering. You see? Who is seeking what? The ego is seeking freedom from the suffering, and he gets that freedom only when he is able to accept totally his suffering is caused by his own sense of personal doership. And then his personal doership is removed, and only the identification remains as a separate entity, which he lives with the total acceptance. Everything happens according to the cosmic law. No one does anything.
What blocks my ability or the flow, allowing life to flow, is my firm conviction of myself as an individual doer person.
But two things. Not as your existence as an individual entity. They are two totally separate factors in one block. Are you a separate entity? Yes. And my point is, that which makes you feel a separate entity, the ego, was not born with your body. The ego identification with the body, I am told, happened between the ages of 2 and 3. But once the ego comes, which is identification with a particular name and form as a separate entity, that entity is bound to be there until the last breath in that body. But that identified individual entity, considering itself the doer of his action, that is a separate, which is the vicious part, which is the spiritual cancer. So, you can't give up your identity. Therefore, the identity as a separate person must continue with the highest stage at any stage until the last breath. off and on, he may forget his being an entity and be in a state of mind where the identification is not there. That could be, but there were periods. In your deep sleep, there is no separation there as a separate entity. In your meditation, you are not a separate entity. But basically, in your waking state, when you are not in meditation, when you are not in sedation, when you are not in deep sleep state, the identity as a separate has to be there. So the ego, therefore I say, enormous confusion by the poor spiritual seeker being told, very simple, just give up your ego, kill your ego. Enormous confusion. Who is told to kill his ego? Who is told to give up his ego? Other than the ego, there is no you, Ben. That is my whole point. All there is a body-mind organism created by the source, and for life to happen, the source, the awareness or consciousness had to identify itself with the body-mind organism and create an ego so that life could happen. So the ego, which is identified consciousness, has to remain in the body so long as there is consciousness in the body. But the realization is very simple. Again, who is the seeker? You are told to get freedom from your ego. Isn't that right? You as the seeker, Ben, are told to have freedom from your ego. And you are the ego. Therefore, the basic question for the spiritual seeker, who is seeking what? What is sought is freedom. So, who is seeking freedom from what? There is no you to seek freedom from the ego. You are the ego. Therefore, from beginning to end, it is the ego who is the spiritual seeker. Therefore, what does the ego seeker want? Freedom. Therefore, the question is, what does the ego seeker seek freedom from? The ego seeker seeks freedom from his almost innate sense of personal doership. The basic. What is the basis of spiritual freedom? The ego seeker seeks freedom from that aspect of doing which is part of its existence. So the illusory you do not seek freedom from the ego. You are the ego seeker, and you are seeking freedom from that element of doership which is part of the ego. In other words, doership can be removed, and Ben will still continue to live as a separate entity, Ben. I repeat, doership can be removed, and Ben will continue to live as Ben, the same separate entity.
What really happened 20 years ago? It can't have been just that you weren't the doer, because you more or less knew it.
You mean what exactly happened when I had this total understanding?
To you.
Oh,
right.
That is simple. What happened was, at a particular, you see, at the time of Diwali, you know Diwali, that was the only occasion when I didn't know that until Maharaj would have no talks, and a team of 8 or 10 people would clean up the whole his area. So the first time I was there, a fellow disciple, he suggested, instead of not having the satsang, why not have it at his place, which is quite close? And most of the people knew it, and he being an engineer, he left a map for those who didn't. So at that time, that particular Diwali when I was there, we had this satsang at my friend's place. And since it was his place, he also did the translation. He suggested that in any case I do the translation that morning because he would be busy with people coming in. So I'm doing the translation. So while I was doing the translation, at that particular moment, normally the translation is, I had to listen to what Maharaj said in Marathi, translate it mentally in English, and thereafter vocalize it, which was a certain minimum process in time. But at that, suddenly, I found that the process had stopped. I could hardly wait for the old man to stop talking. And I remember being impatient. Why does this stop? And the moment he stopped, my talking happened without any break of the slightest thing. In other words, my translation began to be spontaneous, immediate and spontaneous. I knew too that it was really good translation. The people who heard it, many foreigners, noticed it too. And Maharaj noticed it too. So where was the change in case of Maharaj? I'll tell you. Earlier, if there was any doubt that the translation was not correct, Maharaj didn't know English, but enough to see it. So he would stop the translation. What did you say now? So the translator had to say, and he would say, no, that is not what I mean. And he would explain what it is and translate. He used to ask me too. Not too many times, 2 or 3 times. And each time when I explained, he said, that is correct. But from that morning on, never once did he ask me, what did you say? He knew too, something had happened. But that is what had happened. No experience. Now, you can call this experience too. Maharaj knew something had happened that day. Because sometime later, he told me, Ramesh, no, he didn't say Ramesh. He didn't say anything, I think. I'm glad it's happened, at least in one case. He looked at me. I was surprised. So he must have seen it in my face. Well, he said, maybe in 1 or 2 cases, the understanding is deep. Maybe. So he had accepted that only in one case, according to it had happened. And therefore, later, once again, the only time he had ever asked someone else to talk on his behalf, the only time, he was very ill. He was lying down. He was talking, but lying down. And a group of people came from a place called Satara, about 200 miles from Bombay. A group of 6 or 8 people on a Sunday morning. So he told that group, he said, look, instead of asking different questions, I'm not well. Discuss for 2 or 3 minutes among yourselves, decide on what questions to ask, and you ask the questions. Instead of each one talking, decide among your own the questions which your group wants to ask. Then he had to go downstairs to the laboratory or whatever, to the toilet. Before leaving, he said, but you continue. And he pointed to us, he will answer. First time he had agreed someone else to talk. He said, he will answer. But there were no questions and I didn't have to answer. And Maharaj was angry. So he knew he knew that I didn't talk then or I didn't talk later, in spite of his. So that the day before he died, the morning before he died, I was there. The interpreter was there. Someone was, and he was so ill. If he wanted something, he had to find out whether he whispered something, whether he wanted water or something like that. He was so ill. And then suddenly, such an ill person suddenly gets on his elbow and shouts at me. He says, "Why don't you talk?" And then he falls back. I thought that was the end. But he lasted that day. He said, "Why don't you talk?" So when in his dying moment, he wanted me. From that day on, I started talking.
Omkara Swarupa Sadguru Samartha Omkara Sadguru Samartha Anatha Natha Tujha Namo Tujha Namo Tujha Namo.
In the beginning, I think it was challenging to kind of totally accept his concept intellectually, but slowly I am getting to that point.
The first thing that hit me is when he started to say that we all come from the same source, and therefore we are all one. And you know, it's like this universal brotherhood. I like that, you know, and I said, wow.
I didn't know I could live without the sense of responsibility. You know, I thought I had to feel responsible, feel guilty, improve myself all the time. That was stress. Yeah. It's no more there.
And it helps you kind of let go instead of trying to control everything in your life.
I know his teaching by heart, but I don't know how much of it has gone inside me.
I think it brings a lot of peace and harmony into one's life, and it simplifies life. I think it makes life simpler and more enjoyable.
He's so precise, so clear. His teaching is so remarkable.
I think a lot of things Ramesh says is practically sounds practical to the mind.
Very clear, wonderful teacher actually, explains things beautifully.
Fundamental aspect of Advaita is the non-doership, which is not brought out so much by other teachers. So the sin and guilt doesn't arise.
There's no mysticism in it. There's no. It's just simple and straight to the point, and I think that's the beauty of it for me.
After 45 minutes of meeting him, I felt so light that I knew he was my guru. Many people who are seekers don't know what it is they are seeking. The two major things which, to my mind, he has done in Advaita, teaching of Advaita is the aspect of non-doership, which he has concentrated on, and the aspect of enlightenment. What do you mean by enlightenment? After having enlightenment, what is your life?
Over a long period of time, I've been looking for something, but not actually quite sure what. And I think with Ramesh I found it, and what I found was just that concept that I'm not the doer.
I'm glad I learned it from him. I asked all my problems, difficulties, whatever, and I got them cleared. And I'm glad I learned.
I adore him. What else is there to say?
It's always a pleasure to interact with him.
Absolutely delightful. Light and witty and natural, very approachable.
He's a wonderful person, yeah. I really like him.
He just has a lot of wisdom and experience and a great sense of humor.
I have a lot of love for him as both a guru and a person.
Very strong principles, very disciplined with themselves, with work, and certain old values like family, friends.
He seems very wise, very alive to me, although he is 87 years old now, or maybe it's better to say young.
Sometimes I tell him, why don't you take one day off in the week as rest? But he said no, he doesn't need it. He doesn't need it.
Some words of advice to you? Very simple. Honestly, very simple. In a given situation, do whatever you think you should do and let life flow. Simple, isn't it? In any given situation, do whatever you think you should do and let life flow. Agreed?
Absolutely.
Did I say that or did you say that? Who cares?